F1 returns to Imola for the first time since 2022, but there's been changes to the tracks, and does that mean changes for our F1 fantasy teams? Let's find out. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of F1 Fantasy Pole Position. My name is Ewan, and on today's episode, we are going to get into a Imola Grand Prix preview episode with a week to go before we return to Imola after skipping out on 2023 due to the unfortunate flooding that happened there. It's going to be very interesting to see how the cars development over the last two seasons since 2022 have really changed this track, and it sounds like there's been changes made to the actual track itself, so we are definitely going to check that out. But right off the top here, if you could like and subscribe to the YouTube channel or give it a 5 stars thumbs up on the audio podcast side, it would be greatly appreciated for the support, trying to get this out to more people, trying to kind of grow the channel, grow the podcast, and any help would be appreciated. So if I've helped you out at all over the first 6 races of the F1 Fantasy 2024 season, I would greatly appreciate just clicking that button. But now that all of that is taken care of, let's get right into it here with an Imola Grand Prix preview. The Autodromo Enzo E. Dino Ferrari track, 4.909 kilometers, 63 laps, 19 corners, 1 DRS zone, and the first Grand Prix here was in 1980. The last time we raced here was 2022. There was a sprint. It was actually during the time where Ferrari was still rather competitive with Red Bull during that first year of the ground effect regulations. If you can remember that far back, Charles Leclerc was actually kind of bringing it to Max Verstappen every weekend. He had an unfortunate mistake in the Grand Prix that kind of cost him a few places. There was a sprint race. I remember Lewis Hamilton getting stuck behind Pierre Gasly in a DRS train. So lots to kind of think about ahead of the 2024 edition of this race. But there have been some changes to the track, like I've talked about or teased off the top here. So we are going to get into that as well. But it'll be good to return to Imola for the first time since 2022. Session times for the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, your regularly scheduled Grand Prix after 2 sprint weekends in China and Miami. It is we're gonna have 3 practice sessions, which is going to be very valuable, as in Miami, it was Mercedes and McLaren that brought upgrades, and obviously those upgrades helped as Lando Norris won his first Grand Prix ever in 110 starts. But this week, it sounds like Aston Martin, Red Bull, and Ferrari are supposed to be bringing upgrades. So with 3 practice sessions, we should be getting tons of data to see how these teams are doing. I don't think the stranglehold on the 2 constructors between Red Bull and Ferrari is going to get broken all that easily, but McLaren is putting its hat in the ring, and Aston Martin has had something happen to it that could pique its interest in F1 Fantasy Managers lineups. So practice 1 will be 1:30 local time, 12:30 UK time, 7:30 a.m. US Eastern. Practice 2 is a few hours later, 5 p.m. local, 4 p.m. UK, and 11 a.m. US Eastern. Practice 3 is about the same time as it was on Friday, but the qualifying, the lock, our teams are actually locking at qualifying for the first time in a few races here. So it's going to be 4 p.m. local time in Italy, 3 p.m. UK time, and then 10 a.m. US Eastern. So don't get caught out by the later lineup lock this week, as we've normally had to, or the last 2 races, we've had to lock in our lineups the first session of a Saturday. Now we get 1 extra practice, and then the Grand Prix on Sunday is 3 p.m. local time, 2 p.m. UK time, 9 a.m. Eastern. So definitely check that out on Sunday. I know you will all be watching, as will I. Weather for the weekend is still kind of far out, but it looks like there might be some rain in the forecast. Friday is going to be a high of 23 degrees Celsius with a 70% chance of rain. Saturday is going to be dry, high of 24 degrees Celsius. And then Sunday, 25 degrees Celsius, 75% chance of rain, but it does say those should be in the afternoon, like late afternoon. So with the Grand Prix happening at 3 p.m., we could be getting some changing conditions, which would make for a fantastic race. but it could be something to think about in our F1 fantasy lineups as well. Maybe throw some chaos into the mix once again in F1 fantasy. 2022 Imola Grand Prix went like this in qualifying, which was happened on a Friday. Do you remember when the sprints used to like when a sprint weekend that used to the qualifying was on a Friday? That seems so long ago. That's now the third straight year they've changed the sprint weekend format. I think I like this version better. Let me know in the comments below if you prefer the 2022, 2023, or 2024 version of the sprint weekends. I'm sure I'll get some comments below saying scrap them all together. I don't even like sprint weekends, but regardless, let me know what your favorite is in the comments below. So Max came out on top in qualifying and in the race. Charles Leclerc was second, followed by Lando in qualifying. But in the actual race, Charles Leclerc fell to sixth place after he tried to he was overly aggressive on the chicane there and kind of like went airborne, and it did not go well and kind of spun around, nearly hit the wall, but was able to get back in. Lando Norris got podium. Sergio Perez was second. That's when Red Bull really started to kind of flex its muscles in the 2022 season. George Russell was fourth. Valtteri Bottas here is highlighted. He was fifth after finishing eighth in qualifying. The car has obviously changed quite a lot between 2022 and 2024, but Valtteri showing some good form here could keep him in some of our F1 fantasy lineups. Like I said, Charles Leclerc was sixth, Yuki Tsunoda seventh, Sebastian Vettel eighth, Kevin Magnussen ninth, and Lance Stroll 10th. There's going to be some different tire compounds for the Imola Grand Prix here as well. They're going to bring the C3, the C4, and the C5. They're actually going to bring those three compounds for the next three races in Imola, Monaco, and Canada. So we will get lots of data on that. That'll be the first time we've used this set of compounds since Australia, where Carlos Sainz won after a Max Verstappen DNF. Charles Leclerc got second, and Lando Norris got a podium there as well. So the McLarens and the Ferrari did quite well on these compounds as well. We'll see if that keeps up after all of these upgrades come along. From what I've read about these Ferrari upgrades, it's going to be the best thing since sliced bread. So don't want to get our hopes up too high, as Ferrari sometimes have a tendency to let us down. I'm wearing the 75th Monza anniversary yellow Ferrari shirt here. For those watching on the YouTube channel, is quite bright, but very Ferrari. So we'll see. It sounds like fans are very excited about these upgrades. Seems like everything I'm reading is they are really trying to bring it to Red Bull, coming off the back of Lewis Hamilton signing in the preseason. All these Adrian Newey rumors are flying around. By the time this publishes, it could be official. It could not be. Who even knows? But yeah, just C3, C4, C5, and Imola for the tires. Ferrari and McLaren did quite well on those in Australia. It'll be interesting to see if that carries over to Imola. Speaking of Imola, this was noticed on Reddit from the F1 Fan 2004 account. So it's three turns have kind of changed here. If you're listening on the podcast side, unfortunately, like, you just got to get over to the YouTube channel real quick at Backup Fantasy Sports, and then find the F1 Fantasy Pole Position playlist. So there's been three changes since the 2022 track. So Piratella turn 9, it looks like the asphalt runoff has been removed with more gravel traps, and turns 11, 12, and 13, the asphalt runoff has been reduced there. And then in Grassini, turns 14 and 15, there has been a gravel trap added. And if you ask me, this is just lining up for safety cars. So over here on the right, got a little meme here. It says, from the Parks and Rec scene when I believe it's the Venezuelan delegation comes to Pawnee, Indiana, and the guy's like, straight to jail. So it says gravel traps, straight to safety car. Kind of think we're going to get a safety car in Imola, possibly two. Like, it just feels like there's going to be a beached car. They're going to have to get it out of the track. And yeah, safety car should shake things up just like it did in Miami. So we'll definitely be curious to see how that goes in Italy on Sunday. But yeah, good track changes, makes it a little bit tougher for drivers. 2022 at this point, Oscar Piastri and Logan Sargent were not on the grid. I don't know enough about their F2 history to know if they have raced at Imola before. They probably have, but I don't entirely know that for sure. So this will be their first weekend in an F1 car on this track. So maybe that will be a slight challenge for them, because even though it's their sophomore seasons, it will be their first time racing F1 at Imola. So maybe another thing to think about when it comes to Logan Sargent and Oscar Piastri. The overtakes I kind of wanted to touch on as well. So in Miami, I brought up that the average overtakes were a little bit fewer than the remaining sprint races. So, kind of on a roll there, just looking at the overtake data. And it was interesting because in Imola 2022, the 20 drivers averaged 1.1 overtake points in that entire race, which is really low, because if you compare that to the 2022 average per race, the drivers averaged 2.3 overtake points per race. In 2023, last season, the drivers averaged 4.5 overtake points per race. And so far in 2024, they've averaged 3.7 overtake points per race. So if Imola remains how it was in 2022, which was a pretty tough track to overtake, there were some going on, obviously, like 1.1, but not a lot. If a DRS train is still really strong here, um, it could be very important where your guys qualify. So that qualifying data that we're going to get from F1.com in their practice debrief on Friday night, we will really have to look into that. The sims from F1 Fantasy Tools, the sims from 11FI, all that stuff will be very important to kind of take into consideration when it comes to our F1 fantasy lineups. I did read on the Pirelli like kind of press release about the compounds that they're bringing the softer compounds, because in 2022 they brought the C2, C3, C4, and that was too hard. It kind of made it for a boring race. So it does sound like Pirelli is going a little bit outside of his comfort zone here, bringing softer tires, hoping to introduce like a little bit more strategy, maybe a little bit faster pace, more tire dag into the race. So hopefully that produces some F1 fantasy points and some good overtake opportunities for our drivers. But yeah, according to this kind of small sample size historical data, Imola, not the best track for overtaking, and it could prove tough on Sunday to kind of get up the leaderboard in terms of like F1 grid position. So definitely something to think about there. And kind of continuing on this thread, at F1 Big Data on X, he has this excellent chart every week, this similarity between circuits kind of chart that he does, which I would definitely give him a follow. He's they're well worth it. So they say, what can we expect in Imola? If we look at the 2023 track map with data from China 2024 and Imola 2022, we didn't race there in 2023. We can see how Suzuka is extremely similar to Imola. So we can expect similar performance, but taking into account the upgrades that the teams have introduced since then. So he has a little circle with all this graphics and stuff on here, and it says Imola is very similar to Suzuka from this season. So we will look at the Japanese Grand Prix fantasy results here. So on the left, I've got the drivers. On the right, I've got the constructors. And it makes for a pretty templatey picture. So in Japan, Max had 47 points, Sergio had 33, Charles had 31, Carlos had 28, Lando 19, Fernando 14, Russell and Stroll with 13, and then Yuki Tsunoda, Nico Hulkenberg, and Oscar Piastri had 10 points. On the constructor side, Red Bull absolutely dominated with 108 points, Ferrari 59, McLaren 39, Aston Martin 32, Mercedes 28, Haas 20, Alpine 11, and then Visa Cash App, Kick Sauber, and Williams all finished in the negative. So this kind of puts me towards, there's going to be a couple of constructions that you can build this weekend in F1 Fantasy, or more than a couple, I would say. But the Max, Red Bull, Ferrari would be very strong lineup, obviously. I mean, if you can fit in Nico Hulkenberg into your squad now as well, that seems like a pretty good recipe if Imola is going to play out very similar to the Japanese Grand Prix. I mean, Red Bull with 108 points in that race, that is insane. So I think it's going to be tough to get away from Red Bull and Ferrari. However, as I tweeted out earlier in the week, Aston Martin fell 0.5 million after the Miami Grand Prix and has dropped back down to the lowest price tier, With upgrades set to come in Imola, could they be back on the menu as a budget building constructor in F1 Fantasy? So if you have no idea what I'm talking about here, um, first of all, go back and look at all the content that came out about when the price changes, like kind of formula was figured out. Then you'll catch up very quickly. F1 Fantasy Hub has great video on it. Rain Fantasy has a great video on it. Zach F1 probably covered it as well. And F1 Fantasy HQ had a pretty good article on it as well. So go check all that out if you have not caught up on the price changing system here. But I've tried to explain it here. So before Miami, Aston Martin was 15.1 million, which meant they were in the tier B of price brackets. So that meant, depending on how they did in the race, they could go up or down a certain amount. Now that they are in the C tier, which is everything up to 15 million, they can go. They are not really as affected that much by a bad race, but they can really produce if they have a good race. So if you're in the tier B and you score less than 0 points, you go down 0.5 million. If you are between 0 to 0.5 of the normalized points, which is the average score rounded to, I think it's 1 decibel, they said. And the average of all the constructors put together and then down to the nearest the first decimal, I think is right. Then you'll be placed between, if you score between 0.5, 0 to 0.5 of that score with your score. I'm explaining this extremely poorly. You should definitely go watch those videos. Regardless, it is a lot easier to gain budget when you're in the tier C. So if you kind of score positive points, if you score like 1 point on for the average, you're going to go up 0.5 in the tier C. If you score more than that, you're going to go up 1 million. And if you score 3 times the average, you're going to go up 1.5. We are guessing just none of the tier C assets so far this year have gone up or have had 3 times the average score. That would take a insane, like that would probably be like, we're only going to figure that out if like Lance Stroll gets on the podium just in a random race. But I wanted to bring this up because Aston Martin was kind of a dead asset at 15.1 million because that's in the same price bracket as Ferrari and McLaren, and you might as well get the points that Ferrari and McLaren bring if they're going to go up at the same rate as Aston Martin. However, now that they've gone down a tier, it is something where you could consider putting Aston Martin in your F1 fantasy lineup ahead of the Imola Grand Prix. Speaking of F1 fantasy lineups, here is where my squad is at after the Miami Grand Prix. If you didn't catch my lineup lock on when I revealed it on X, which you can follow me at UNFPL. And you can watch my FPL videos as well while you're on there on the YouTube channel if you would like. But anyways, this is where the squad is at heading into Imola. Lando Norris, Kevin Magnussen, Yuki Tsunoda, Valtteri Bottas, Alexander Albon with Red Bull and Ferrari as the constructors. In my early thoughts video last week, I was pretty set on getting rid of Kevin Magnussen. Still feel like that's the play for me as of right now, before anything kind of, like, we haven't even had media day yet. So we'll see if anything comes to light in regards to the upgrades, if we get any official word on what they're going to be or sneak peeks or whatever. So I think I'm going to get rid of Kevin Magnussen and bring in Nico Hulkenberg just because he's cheaper, feels more reliable, more consistent this season. I kind of got caught up in K-Mag always going up 0.5, but he's just driving so dangerously, and I feel like a race ban is in his future. I'm not sure if F1 would actually give a race ban to one of its 20 drivers, but crazier things have happened. So I'm going to get off of K-Mag before he starts falling anymore. I think Nico is about to pass him in price as well. After one more good race, I do expect Nico to be above K-Mag in price. So jumping on that right now. And that would give me one more transfer to get either Valtteri Bottas or Alexander Albon out of my lineup. There is the possibility that I could just roll. That's probably always the first option if you are if you don't really have a lot to do. It's never a bad thing to have 3 transfers heading into a race week. So If you don't have to force it kind of thing. Like if I just wake up on Saturday and I'm fine with this lineup, I'll probably stick with it and roll. However, I will have 2.8 million in the bank here, so it's kind of tempting to, increase one of these two assets here because Sauber and Williams are by far the two worst cars on the grid right now. I know maybe that's controversial to say over Alpine. Let me know in the comments below or on the podcast if you think who you think the worst car is out of Alpine, Kick Sauber, and Williams. I would say Alpine is steadily climbing up the ranks. They're obviously putting in the hours. They're trying to improve the car quite a lot. They scored points in Miami for the first time this season. So I think I'm going to give them the nod over Kick Sauber and Williams. Valtteri Bottas has raced pretty well the last couple of races as well. I think considering where expectations were coming into the season, some people thinking Williams could maybe take a jump closer to the top of that midfield, but now they're all the way at the bottom again. Haas has surpassed them. Visa Cash App RB has surpassed them. I think I would maybe give them title, maybe not the worst car on the grid, but like the biggest disappointment through the first 25% of the F1 season. So yeah, once again, let me know in the comments below if I am totally off base, if you agree, if you disagree. Let's talk F1. Always happy to do that. Or hit me up on X at UNFPL. So the 2.8 million here could get me off of Valtteri Bottas, and I could get up to anyone that's costing 9.5. So that includes Esteban Ocon, Daniel Ricciardo, Pierre Gasly. I could just get K-Mag back in as well. So that would be double Haas. Not a huge fan of that either. But yeah, pretty much my pick of the back markers. Even if I got rid of Valtteri Bottas, if I got rid of Alexander Albon, I'd kind of be in the same spot. 10.8 million, could pick whoever I wanted. I still believe in Alexander Albon. I think if he can get a good qualifying in, he can kind of stick that Williams in the middle of the track. He's pretty good at defending. I would feel confident in him doing all right. Yuki, I'm not going to get rid of him. I think he's driving really, really well. So as of right now, I think the only guaranteed transfer for me in my sensible thinking, I should preface this. This is my sensible thinking ahead of Imola Grand Prix. Now I'm kind of going to get into, I could do some weird stuff here. So if we're talking about, say Aston Martin looks like it's having an absolute banger of an upgrade. It could be a little tempting to bring them in. Maybe they go up a whole million in price if they have a really good weekend. That leaves you with a lot of wiggle room here. I mean, I could get up to max here. So that would be the two transfers. That would be Lando to Max and Ferrari to Aston Martin. It would still leave me 3.7 in the bank. So still enough wiggle room here to get off of Valtteri Bottas. I could even get Yuki Tsunoda up to Lance Stroll, going with double Aston Martin. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 17 other times over the last 3 seasons. Probably shame on me at this point with Lance Stroll. Let me know how many times Lance Stroll has broken your F1 fantasy heart. I cannot seem to count that high at this point, but I could go with that route. So I could bring in Max, and that would leave me with Yuki. This would definitely require a wild card that I only have 2 free transfers. But say the Ferrari looks great and I want to get over to Charles. That would leave me with 11.6 million. And with Yuki, I could get up to Oscar or Carlos as well. So if I was just really feeling it, wanted to get the budget. I mean, I think if those Ferrari upgrades are looking really good, Charles, Carlos, and Aston Martin could all rise a million. I think now is the time. I said this on X earlier this week as well. The next 4 races, Imola, Monaco, Canada, and Spain are all just normal Grand Prix weekends. So this is really the time that we want to be building budget again, get our teams up to like snuff with the money, because in Austria, there will be teams, I think, that can run a really good lineup that could possibly be the time to play the extra DRS boost chip. I think It's maybe a little bit of a stretch. I'd probably have to do some hokey cokey math on the fly that I'm not going to be very good at. But it could be a case where you can maybe afford Red Bull, Ferrari, Charles and Carlos Sainz, and maybe that would be a good area to kind of play your extra DRS, or you could maybe even go like a Checo and a Lando. I don't think we'd be able to get up to a Max and like another top tier driver at that point, but maybe. Let me know in the comments below or on X what your budget is and if you think that that is possible. It would be tough. 4 races to go, though. I think there's already people at, like, 113 million, so 113, 114 million, in their budget, so and that's through 6 races, so, yeah, it would be a stretch, but I think there's gonna be a lot of teams with a really big budget by the time we get to Austria, so we have to use some of our transfers to kinda catch up to them, because by the time the last 3 races of the season come along, if they don't have that budget by Austria, they're definitely going to have it by Austin or Qatar or Brazil, I would think. So I need to get my giddy up on and get some of this budget into my build. But there's a couple of weird constructions that I could go with in Imola. Ferrari's home race, not too far from their kind of headquarters. So it could be something to think about there as well. As of right now, I'm probably just going to go with the sensible option. Lando, I guess the other transfer I would make is if Ferrari do look like they're going to be way better than McLaren, or if Sergio looks a lot stronger than he has in the last couple of races. I'll just bring Ferrari back in as my constructor, hope to get my points over there. I'll keep Yuki as another back marker. And then, yeah, I can get Sergio and kind of whoever I want as the back marker here, which would be Nico Hulkenberg. And that would still just be my regular 2 transfers as well. So maybe that is a good option as well. If I drop down a tiny bit here, it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I could also do like Charles and Lance Stroll along with Red Bull and Ferrari, Yuki, Valtteri, and Alexander Albon. The only thing I know is that Kevin Magnussen will not be in my F1 fantasy lineup come the Imola Grand Prix deadline. Let me know in the comments below what definite transfers you have locked in as of now until the data shows that you do not want to be doing that. But yeah, I think there's still a while to go. Just what's your early transfers? Let me know. Let's talk it out. Let me know what you think about my early thoughts or where my head is at if I'm going a little bit too crazy with the Ferrari and the Aston Martin kind of thing. I don't think I'll go Aston Martin when the deadline kind of gets here, but it is creeping into my thoughts a little bit. Like if those upgrades look really good, the price jump, not a lot of people are going to be doing it. So that means that you could really gain something on the rest of the field, but it is something to consider moving towards Imola. One last reminder of the lineup lock on Saturday, May 18th in Italy. Local time, it's going to be 4 p.m., UK 3 p.m., USA Eastern 10 a.m. Do not miss the deadline, but also you might wake up on Saturday morning thinking, I missed the deadline because the last 2 were sprints, but you should still have some time. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of F1 Fantasy Pole Position, the Imola Grand Prix preview. I will be back next week with a review episode and a early thoughts episode ahead of the next Grand Prix. But let me know where you're at in the world, what you're thinking ahead of Imola. Always happy to discuss F1 fantasy. Do you think Adrian Newey is going to go to Ferrari? Is that official yet? Yeah, and just any more silly season madness that's on the horizon. Very much looking forward to the summer break and silly season kicking into full swing, even though it has steadily trickled along as the season has gone past the quarter mark. But once again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I will talk to you next time.